Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Communications and Conversations. I'm your host, John Crook. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode where we're going to be discussing digital. We're diddling it. No, I don't want to say that. That's not a good idea, especially with Diddy. All right, we're not gonna talk about it that way, but we're gonna be discussing digital. We're gonna be talking about some of the different things about digital, looking at a little bit of a history about digital, and then kind of diving into it. And digital voice, we're talking too, not digital data. Digital data is out there. So many different means of digital data. We've been doing digital data for years. If you had a pager, a numeric or an alphanumeric pager, you were dealing with digital way back then. So digital's been around for quite a while, but digital voice is really there. It's almost a proliferation of digital voice has started to kind of come onto the market. And we're not just talking about actual amateur stuff either. We're not talking about business stuff either. We're talking about everything across the board. So we're talking about commercial, public safety, all that kind of stuff like that. And there's sometimes people will say digital is the devil. That's what I always go ahead and tell people. Digital is the devil. That's what they say. I like digital voice. To me, that's just me. But without further ado, let me hop in here with our co-host again. Joining us today live via the interwebs is Wally, N9VAO. So he, you do a little digital, don't you?
Oh gosh, yes. Digital has been a tremendous improvement over two-way communications compared to analog or even just regular FM.
Yeah, and if we look at the history, a lot of people are like, well, where did digital voice come from? Why? I guess I get the biggest question when I get into these digital conversations with people. And I'm not just talking amateur only, too. I really want to stress that because some people know the different hats that I wear, and some people are like, oh, all this about amateur. No, it's like even if we look at, like, let's go to consumer type digital, the digital cell phones, right? Like, why did we go digital? What was the purpose of going digital? And there's a lot of benefits to digital that I don't think people are really aware of, that it really kind of makes sense to go digital.
Well, one thing to bring out to people that aren't too familiar with it is your television system. Remember, I forgot how long ago now it would be. It could be 8 to 10 years ago now. All television transmissions have become digital.
That was a while ago.
Definitely,
Yeah, it was a while ago. Yeah.
Has improved television reception by going digital.
Yeah, and there's like I said, I know some people are like, well, let me back up this way. I think what people have is they have an issue with the cost, is my opinion. Remember, when I remember the first podcast, I was going to go ahead and saying, I'll let you know when it's my opinion versus that. And this right now is the opinion of John Crook and solely of John Crook only, is that I think people have a problem with the cost of doing digital.
Well, yeah, it's more expensive, but then again, you have to look at the long end of it, though, and at the end is that it's a lot better than the normal old analog used to be.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I remember having the bag phone, the kind that looked like you can call in an airstrike and throw across the gymnasium, pick it up and use it. And yeah, you're right. When we first started to do those kind of cell phones, it's like, after a while, it kind of be like that.
Yeah.
Where with digital, you don't have that. Now, granted, with digital, you have the in some situations, but as digital technology is growing, they've been able to get rid of some of those issues.
Oh, yeah. The biggest complainers out there were definitely the Scannerland people that used to have the old analog type scanners.
Yes.
And then when law enforcement, fire departments, all the different types of services went digital, all they kept hearing coming out of their scanner, even though they're the same frequency as before, all they heard coming out of the speaker was this sound,
Yeah.
And that's it.
And that's a good point to point out, because when people are saying digital, they're like, well, yes, the audio sounds different in this, but if you're listening on an analog scanner, like if you were listening to us talking and we're talking on a radio and we're analog, you're going to hear us like this on an analog scanner. But when you were talking digital, our voice is actually being changed into digital data, which we'll cover that in a moment, and it's going out on there. Now, I know we said we weren't going to talk about digital data, but in this case, we're having our analog voice being converted into a series of ones and zeros, and that ones and zeros on the other end with that digital radio is being decoded into audio that we can hear with our human ear. But yes, if you're listening, you're going to be on the scanner, you're going to be like, "Arr,"
Yeah.
it sounds like a motorboat or a car or something like that on there because that's digital data
Yes. Yeah.
at that point.
Exactly.
Now, if we look at it, digital voice actually has been around even into like the 90s, like the early 90s, the mid 90s. I will really say that I kind of came into it in the mid 90s, with starting to hear about how people were experimenting with it, playing with it, and everything like that on there. I know I've heard stories of people saying, oh yes, this was done in there. But as time went along, there was actually a point where there were different networks out there that it wasn't actually truly digital voice. It was kind of converting your voice to a data format and then doing it, but it had a lot of issues. And it wasn't really until we could get a vocoder, a voice. So we're going to talk about a couple terms today here. So there might be like a footnote part, and that's what it is. A vocoder is a voice encoder decoder. So as we just kind of talked about, if you're using a digital radio, you're going to key it up. It's going to go into that vocoder. That vocoder takes it and matches it to puts it in a series of ones and zeros, sends it out, and then your radio receives it on the other end, has that vocoder in it, and decodes it into there. But as vocoder technology has increased, digital voice has increased. And I know you've seen that since, you kind of sort of jumped into digital about 2014, 2015, I think?
Yeah. Something like that back then. Yep.
Yeah, and it's picked up with amateur, public safety, obviously, commercial. Who else am I forgetting?
Well, cell phones, of course, like you mentioned
Cell
earlier,
phones,
have
yeah.
all gone all. It has to be all digital. You like the bag phone or the old flip phone is no good anymore.
Correct. And now, and that's the other thing too, is a lot of people saying, well, so I guess analog is dead, and it's like, no, analog is not dead. Analog still exists. A lot of people actually, analog is used in different talk around scenarios, talk around situations. I know. I guess it all is going to depend on the situation that you're in, but I think.
Well,
Oh, God.
the radio you have that you're listening to your local radio station, you're either FM or your old AM. That's all analog. That's not digital there yet.
You're right. And well, actually, you did bring that up because there is, so people have kind of asked about that, like if you have a TV, so you made the reference to TV, but radio, like broadcast terrestrial radio, as they used to call it, or still called on there, not satellite radio, but terrestrial radio, that actually uses, when you have those ones that it's like 101.3 dot one or 101.3 dash 2 or 101 dash 3. Guess what? That's actually digital voice. That's a subcarrier of a digital signal kind of put into that whole thing on there. So in satellite radio, if you ever have a satellite radio, that is 100% digital voice on there.
Oh yeah, yeah. I have like Sirius XM radio in the vehicle. Yeah, I know that's digital, but I'm talking about pulling the good old little pocket radio out of your shirt pocket, and tuning into your local FM radio station.
Yep. And the interesting thing I find out about digital voice is, on an average right now, and I'm going to encompass amateur digital voice, and I want to make something clear here. Digital voice is designed for the realm, we'll call it, of what, I don't want to say this so I can help people understand, the realm of what or how it's going to be used. Let's put it that way. So in other words, there are, in essence, there's, in the amateur market, there's two types of different digital voice that was designed, technically three. I think Alinco had some weird variant, but I'm talking about Yaesu System Fusion and D-Star. Excuse me. Those three were designed specifically for amateur usage. Now you move out of the realm of amateur and commercial based. And the reason I say commercial or public safety based is that the IDing is different for the requirements of amateur versus obviously commercial and stuff. But like there's P25, which is APCO 25. There is DMR. There is NextDen. And then there actually is Tetra, which is out there, which is a different type of digital thing. Not too big in the U.S. So if you're listening outside of the U.S., one, let me know because that would be pretty cool. But two, but Tetra, there is a different digital voice technology out there called Tetra, which is sort of like DMR on steroids. But with that being said, there's different ones out there. So if we really want to kind of say it, there's 6 quasi 7 different digital voice modes out there, and I think each one is specifically different for a specific different purpose.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. One will work better with one type of service over basic digital on another type of service. It's all experimental. The new one that you're talking about, I'm sure, is going to come around a lot more in the near future here, and we're going to be finding out a lot more services that'll probably be using it.
I hope it's kind of weird because it's like it's well let's just kind of dive into it. We'll start out with some of the more common ones, right? The biggest common one I think out there is P25.
Yep.
So P25, also known as APCO 25, it was the APCO, so it's Association of Professional Communication Officers. That's what APCO stands for. Came up with a standard to saying, okay, they didn't want to get granular on all the different types of digital voice out there, and they didn't want all the departments to have different types of digital voices out there. So they came up with a standard, and they said, okay, if you are a public safety person, so police, fire, EMS, emergency management, search and rescue, those kind of things, if you want to stay standard, if you want to be able to know that, hey, I have a digital radio and that department has a digital radio that we can communicate together in digital voice, we need to come up with a standard. And that's where the P25 standard comes up from. And what that did is they created a CAI, Common Air Interface, which basically says if you are a quote-unquote P25 radio, you will be able to transmit in these frames with this encoding and all that kind of stuff on there. So P25 is I think the most in the US, now let me put it that way, the most common and well-known P25 or digital voice technology out there. It's used once again by all police or fire or EMS agencies or whatever that want to stay to that standard. Grant funding is even for public safety radios said you got to have P25 capable radios, and they have to be compliant.
Yeah, I seen too, just recently, especially a lot of amateur repeaters across the United States now are going to P25 only.
Yeah, there's that, and that kind of gets into another little part too, is where they have started to take some of these commercial public safety business standards and have started to adopt it into the amateur realm also. So once again, while there is stuff designed just for the amateurs, they've started to adopt it over. Now, I know some people, when I said the most common, probably one on there, people are being like, well, that's not the most common one in the United States, John. I mean, DMR is more popular. Well, DMR more of is a global standard, because while P25 is a APCO standard, APCO is sort of like a US-based organization, right? DMR now is an Etsy, and I'm not talking about the Etsy where I can go ahead and buy a picture of my cat eating a fish Etsy. I'm talking about the ETSI, the European Telecommunication Standard Institute. They came out with a standard that said, we're going to go to digital voice. Now, before I continue on here, I want to backtrack on one thing that I said. And each digital voice technology is designed for a specific purpose. So the purpose of P25 is not only a standard for digital voice usage, but audio quality, right? It's
Yes.
To me, it's going to be the closest thing you're going to get to an analog signal, but in a digital voice format.
Yep. Yeah, that's kind of basically why everything has been going to digital. It's a lot cleaner.
Correct. And P25, if we talk about bandwidth, remember, I kind of talked this about like on some of the old Communications Cigar shows. Take a look on our YouTube channel. Now Communications and Conversations, but back then it was Cigars, where we talked about like bandwidth. So if we think of bandwidth, we think of like an old big country road. That's like the old bandwidth, the large bandwidth, 25 kilohertz, big, one signal going down there. But as we started to get more and more crowded in the radio bands, we've had to make the roads a little bit more narrower to hold that traffic down. And if you watch the old shows, I said analog was that wide dirt road, and digital now is that smooth blacktop road with a bunch of different lanes. Well, P25 uses 12.5 kilohertz, which means that it basically is narrowing that road down a little bit.
Yep.
But the FCC, which was a panic back in the day of doing a mandate, said we got to get more smaller frequencies into one another. So that's why we did this narrow banding thing. And you can only compress analog down so far. And I give, and maybe you got a better example, but I give it the kind of the equation of like, is it going to be easier for me to compress sand, which is kind of like analog, or is it going to be able to be easier for me to compress, chocolate bars, which are not all granular and stuff, but are more kind of solid, right? It's going to be obviously chocolate bars, right?
Right.
So that's why they did that. But P25 gives you great audio, but DMR, once again, known worldwide, is that ETSI standard. And then the ETSI standard is very, very in-depth on things. It basically is sort of like that common air interface saying, if you have a DMR radio built to the standards, it will do this, it will do this, it will do this, it will do this. And being it's a free and open standard of how radio should operate, that's why you see so much DMR stuff out there in this day and age.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, that is another nice thing about digital that you brought up here, that you can get more in a narrow band. Nowadays, the more and more we go with communications, we're finding out that bands are becoming overcrowded. And you know what? It might be a silly example, but go way back to the CB days when you only had 23 channels.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, did they eventually end up getting overcrowded. A lot of people in there talking over one another, and all of a sudden the communications got to a point where nobody could hear and understand anybody. Then the FCC said, okay, here's what we're going to do. There are some frequencies that we can add to the CB band. Now you've gone from 23 to 40 channels. Okay, digital has gotten us to a point where we don't have to add more frequencies to a certain service, but like you said, taking it from 25 kilohertz wide down to 12 and a half.
Yep. Yeah. And that's where digital really shines. And while audio quality was for P25, DMR is for channel capacity. Now, without diving into the weeds of the ETSI standard and stuff at the 10,000 foot view, when we were talking about P25, we said, it goes down from 25 kilohertz. We cut that in half. So now the voice only goes in 12.5 kilohertz. But what ends up happening with DMR actually is digital voice, but it adds capacity. So now what you can do is you can actually take and do two simultaneous conversations that don't interfere with one another and put that into that same space where P25 would reside. So instead of having one conversation going in there, DMR uses a technology called TDMA, which if you had a digital cell phone by AT&T back in the day, okay, that was TDMA. Before they have what they have now, it was TDMA. But what that does is that like interlaces the two conversations, and using TDMA, which stands for time division, it basically makes it timed in that signal so that I could be having a conversation for our listeners here with Wally, and you as a listener could be having a conversation with someone else on the same frequency on a different time slot. And basically it's like us going down a 4-lane highway, right? I'm going in one lane, you're in the other lane. We're both headed to different locations, okay, i.e. different conversations, and we're not interfering with one another.
Right. A good example of that too is like on some corporations, some companies. I'm going to use the example of like you've got vehicles out on the highway. You have a certain radio system that you can hit a certain button at the base station, and then everybody in those vehicles will hear you, or you can select to only be able to talk to a certain vehicle, and that certain vehicle will talk back to you without all the other vehicles hearing it.
Yeah, and that's the kind of the neat part about it. With digital, that allows you to do that. You couldn't do that before with
Nope.
analog. So once again, all the different digital vehicle or all the different digital voice modes have there. But we got a
Yes.
few more digital voice modes we're going to talk about. But let me pause here real quick. Let me take a minute and tell you that if you live in Northwest or West Central Wisconsin, you can take advantage of a digital network for your purpose and your needs. That's the JJK Communications JJK Connect system. That's right. JJK Connect is a two-way radio network. Doesn't need cell phones, doesn't need nothing. It's basic, simple, easy two-way communications using two-way radio technology and DMR, digital voice technology. With DMR and the JJK Connect system, you can talk locally to whether it be friends or family or for business purposes, or be able to reach to the far extent regions of the network through roaming capabilities, have the technology and the operation of cell phones, but using two-way radio at half to almost three-fourths less than what a normal cell phone is going to cost you. And guess what? Because it's digital, because it's JJK Connect through JJK Communications, you can actually have features on there, such as call alert, text messaging, private calling, and encryption capabilities. If you want to find more information on the JJK Connect system or how you can utilize it and take advantage of seamless, easy communications that go beyond the limitations of cellular, contact JJK Communications today. You can go out to their website at www.jjkcom.com or by calling 715-338-8458 today. All right, let's jump back in. There's a few more I want to touch on before today's episode, and sometimes these episodes are only 30 minutes, but they go by so quick. The other one that came out there, so once again, DMR, was using that 12 and a half kilohertz bandwidth to put the two conversations down. Okay, cool, not a problem. But then there was what we call the next gen IDAS type technology, which once again is digital voice. And now we're not 12 and a half, we're down to 6.25. So if we really think we're 1/4 the bandwidth of what an analog signal is, and that's a little bit different because they're only using 6.5 kilohertz bandwidth to be able to carry out that conversation. So that is they call it very narrow band or extremely narrow band. I forgot what the term is there. But now what you're doing is, in this case, with using NextDen or IDAS, which NextDen is called by like Kenwood and a few other manufacturers out there, where IDAS is what ICOM calls it for their commercial product line.
Yep.
And then what they're doing is, so you think about it, with P25, we could put two conversations into the same RF path that an analog signal could do. With DMR, we could technically fit 4 conversations in that 25 kilohertz bandwidth spot, but you're taking up 12 and a half kilohertz. Or you can go all the way to NextDen, which is 4, once again, separate conversations taking place with 4 separate usages of those frequencies within that 12 and a half, or excuse me, that 25 kilohertz band space. Mm-hmm. So once again, some digitals are really great for channel capacity. Some are going to be great for audible range and stuff. And NextDen has a very good range, because I've personally used NextDen. Has a very, very good range as compared to like the other modes, like DMR. And DMR uses timing where NextDen doesn't. NextDen's like right there. That's just a really compressed signal.
Yeah. You got to remember one thing, though, that the communication equipment that you're going to be using on those extremely narrow bandwidths has to be really narrow reception. It can't be broadband, or else you're going to be picking up all kinds of other stuff. The narrower, the better, but make sure that the equipment you're using is capable of only focusing in on that one little area and not, well, I don't know how else to put it. anything wider than that, because you'll be hearing more than what you really want to hear.
Yeah, and the equipment out there is commercial equipment out there, available, whether it be for commercial, whether well, let me back up. It goes back to what I said at the beginning. I think people don't have a problem with digital. I think people have a problem with the cost of digital. And of
That's yeah.
course, yeah, when you want it to do more, you're going to pay more. It's like going ahead and saying, I had a 1978 blue Chevelle. I just saw Beverly Hills Cop the other day. 1978 blue, but a blue Chevelle, and now you want a Dodge Durango. Well, you're going to be paying for a brand new Dodge Durango a heck of a lot more than you probably paid for your 1978 blue Chevelle.
Oh yeah.
But are you going to have more features? Are going to have more abilities? Yes, you are going to have more abilities on there. Now,
Yep.
let's shift real quick and talk about the amateur side of things. So while we talked about it, while these last three ones we talked about, P25, DMR, and NextN, are in the commercial realm, where they were designed for the commercial realm and everything like that, they have been adopted to the amateur world. But there are some amateur digital voice modes that came out specifically for amateur. And I think the biggest difference is going to go ahead and be in them is what they can do, or what they're allowed to do, or how they're designed for amateur purposes as compared to commercial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of the big things in amateur, you are assigned a call sign. That call sign is to you, right? You're assigned a call sign as a user. For those that may not be aware of amateur operations, where I'm kind of quickly covering this, you are assigned as a licensed class operator. You have a call sign issued directly to you as an amateur radio operator, and you are given permission to use frequencies within the bands. When we're talking about commercial, public safety, business, all those kind of things, the license is issued to a license holder for a specific frequency.
Yes.
So when your local police department is talking on 154 860, that is a frequency licensed to that agency for that usage of that frequency for that purpose. Amateur radio operators are different. So therefore, the IDing requirements are a little different, and that's why, what does this long story mean? It means why these different digital voices were done to it. So in there, ICOM has their own digital version that they did, which is, in essence, backed by the JARL. And then Yaesu came out with their own digital version, and the two are different. They are very different. They are very different in audio quality. They are very different in the type of purpose that is on there. So,
Yes.
And the different types of technology on there. So both have call sign routing, or not, routing, but call sign embedded into the routing of the data. So when you key up with an amateur radio digital voice mode, that call sign is going to be embedded within that digital voice, or the digital signal for the voice, so that when the other person is receiving it, they're going to see that call sign on there.
Yeah.
Which is a big requirement. You have to ID.
Oh yeah,
You have to.
definitely.
Yeah. But I think then what gets in a difference is the audio quality. You're going to see a difference in audio quality, but you're also going to see a difference in functionality, where just like the other modes that we talked about earlier there, you're going to be talking about bandwidth is different between the two, which, ICOM is more of a more narrower bandwidth, yes, but then they do have some call sign routing features on there, and you can send very low speed data, where once again, the Yaesu System Fusion technology, as they call it, is designed to be higher audio quality and have a purpose on there. So once again, I guess this goes to it. There's cost to equipment, but undeniably, I will go ahead and say this: what is the best digital mode?
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah,
that's up to one's own opinion. If you listen to the different modes, you're going to be picking out one that you like better than all the others.
yep, yep. And that's where I always pose that question to people. I'm like, so what is the best digital mode? And this gets people so fired up. And I tell the people right away afterwards, I'm like, it is totally subjective and objective, right? Subjective and objective in that case is what sounds better to you, what you like, but then also to what may be in usage in your area or on there. We gave, JJK Communications is our supporter of the podcast and the show here. They run DMR. The reason they run DMR is because of channel capacity as well as roaming abilities and things to be able to be done.
Hmm.
You know, is DMR a little bit different in audio sounding than P25? Yes, and that's why
Yeah.
public safety runs P25. So there is no answer. And I think the biggest thing is going to be is there's never going to go ahead and be any sort of answer on there. Now, one last quick thing. There is one more mode. It's just brought up to me here on there. There is M17.
Oh,
M17
yeah.
is an amateur mode also too. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up M17. M17 is a different type of digital mode out there. Um, what sets it apart? It's from the other amateur modes. There gets into this thing. We kind of quickly talked about it. We're not going to go too much into the weeds on this podcast because we're getting close to the end of the show. But there is these things called vocoders. And once again, the vocoders we said is voice encoder decoder. Now there is one company that makes vocoders that everybody uses. So whether you're using P25 or DMR or NextN or D-Star or Yaesu System Fusion or whatever the different digital voice modes on there, they need a vocoder. Even your satellite radio in the car, your Sirius XM satellite radio has that vocoder in there, which I bet a lot of people don't realize that.
Oh, they probably don't, but you have to have it.
You have to have it, right? You have to change something that's going to change that digital data stream, which was your voice, to unpack it and turn it back into audio.
Yep.
Um, M17 doesn't utilize a vocoder, okay? And that's where people will go ahead and you're going to hear this argument saying, oh, technology is proprietary. Well, I'll get into the weeds a little bit on there. You're wrong. This is my opinion. You're wrong because proprietary, in essence, is something that is not available to be done, right? Like it's a secret. I'm not giving you the details of it, right? If I bake you a cake, you like the cake, what do I make it? And I'm saying I'm not telling you, well, that's proprietary. All righty. But if you say, hey, I bake a cake, you baked a cake for me, John. What's in there? Well, there's flour, there's sugar, there's vanilla, there's this, right? That's not proprietary. I told you what it's about, but now you can go make it on your own. Okay?
Uh-huh.
Which people can. All these modes I talked about today, you can find the framing, the data construct of it, how it works and everything. You can find all that out online. You have to do some research on there and stuff because you're looking at a lot of modes, but all of it can be duplicated and you can go ahead and make your own digital radio following those types of different voices or digital modes.
You can copyright those. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm thinking they cannot be copyrighted so that other people cannot use it or
Correct. Yeah, it's not proprietary, so it is an open standard, right? But I think what a lot of people do is they get this thing confused on there. Like for an example, Motorola calls DMR Moto Turbo because they put their little spin on what DMR can do, right? That doesn't mean that doesn't not mean that it's proprietary. No, it just means that Motorola put their little spin on there. So if you wanted to make a radio that's quote unquote Moto Turbo to meet their features, then yes, that would be a little different. But for all intents and purposes, um, it's open standard, so you can do that. The question that comes into this proprietary debate is if you have to use the vocoder. That's it. And I don't know if that's really a grounds for proprietarism on there.
yeah, I'm kind of losing you here.
Oh yeah,
in and out a little bit.
we had a glitch. Yeah, see, we were using digital voice and some analog user just came in and tried to sabotage us. I don't know.
Well, that's one way of
yeah.
putting it.
But that's where a lot of people have that proprietary debate. I think it's going to be the debate that's going to go on for ages and ages and ages. I know as we start to develop AI technology and I know we start to go ahead and do more things, this is going to be very mute in the near future. So,
Yeah.
but I tell people, with it, there are numerous radios that are always coming out in the used market. Buy yourself a used radio. Contact people on there, saying, hey, what do you use if you're an amateur radio operator? Even if you're using it in the commercial aspect or there, get a hold of your radio dealer. And if you need one, I know one called JJK Communications. And say, hey, what is the difference on there? At first, it's a little different, but then the little features and what it can do, I think will really amaze you in your digital voice usage.
Oh yeah, and you know what I'm looking forward to, and I'm sure that there's probably something out there right now, but all these different modes of communications, digital, analog, FM, AM, DMR, all this other stuff. I'm sure that there's going to come a day that there's going to be a radio on the market that's going to be able to copy all, not just a few, but all modes of the communications.
And if we think people complain about the price now,
Oh,
just wait until
they
that thing
will.
comes out. But that is actually going to be another episode where we're going to be doing here in the future on the podcast, talking about dual band multi band, I should say, and multi mode radios.
Yep.
Well, with that clock on the wall has been glaring at me. It's been glaring at me for like the last 5 minutes. It said, dude, you're over your time limit. It's going to go ahead and get in trouble. And I'm actually talking about a clock here, too. I'm not talking about the wife or the producer or anybody else like that on there.
Are you sure?
I'm sure. I'm safe. I'm safe today. But with that, thank you for listening to the podcast. Wally, thank you for coming on the
Great.
podcast again. It was kind of a great little talk about digital voice modes. It's out there. Have fun. Play with it. Let's not turn this into the white zone and the red zone for the immediate unloading and unloading only a passenger situation on there. But with that, thank you for coming on. Thank you for everyone tuning in podcast. Remember to catch us on Podbean or any of the other numerous podcast services that we stream out to, or on our channel here, Communications and Conversations on YouTube. So until then, thank you, Wally.
You're welcome, and glad to be here again.
Thank you, everyone else, and have a good day. And we'll catch you on the next podcast.